Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And North Dakota's had a debate about marijuana that's been going on for a while. We've legalized medicinal marijuana. That's in the laws. That's happening now. North Dakotans can get access to marijuana to treat pain and other sorts of maladies. What is not currently legal in North Dakota is using marijuana just because you want to use marijuana and you like it, in the same way that people crack a beer or smoke a cigarette, I guess. And so we have another ballot measure, and I should point out that we have a little bit of a history. In 2018, there was a ballot measure aimed at passing legalized recreational marijuana. 40.55% of people voted yes, 59.45% voted no. 2022, we had another ballot measure, and it got a little more popular. Just over 45% of people said yes that time. 2021, we actually saw a bill to legalize recreational marijuana pass in the North Dakota House of Representatives, and passed by a pretty strong margin, 56-38. Unfortunately, it was defeated in the North Dakota Senate with just 10 senators voting yes. That brings us to 2024. We now have a new measure on the ballot. It's an interesting proposal. What this measure would do is it would legalize recreational marijuana for anyone 21 years of age or over, basically the drinking age. It would allow 7 manufacturing facilities in the state, 18 dispensaries. That's essentially the stores where you could buy marijuana. And by the way, the dispensaries we wouldn't be seeing marijuana pop up like in the convenience stores. A dispensary would only be allowed to sell marijuana. That's what the business would be for. There's some prohibitions on vertical integration, some limits on, people who own both the manufacturing, and they can't own both. They can't be vertically integrated. And there's a limit on how one individual, how many dispensaries they can be involved in. Users, and by the way, also, the legalization part of all this is that it legalizes. It says people can't be arrested for having, the legal amounts of marijuana that are going to be allowed in this ballot measure if it passes. The other interesting thing I saw is that it also prohibits the state's licensing boards from denying anybody a regular, like an occupational license or something like that, if they're using marijuana legally under this statute. Also, you couldn't be denied participation in public assistance programs. That's also in the measure. Here to talk with me about it, my co-host today, Ben Hansen. Also, Steve Bakken, former mayor of Bismarck, and he is the chair of the new ballot measure committee. Steve, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, Rob?
Did I get everything right there?
Yeah, pretty good. How you doing too, Ben?
I'm doing all right, Steve. I'm sorry you don't have anything left to say about the ballot measure now that Rob's gone over every detail of it.
Well, I do have some questions. And my first question is, first of all, we're going to get into, let's start here. I had another specific question about dispensaries, but let's start here. North Dakotans have said no to legalize recreational marijuana twice before. And then the legislature, their elected officials, at least one chamber of it, also said no. What's different about this proposal that you think is going to get the vote over the majority level that it needs to become law?
We're seeing the trends, and as those numbers have ticked up each time this has come up, what I don't want to see is an out-of-state initiated measure come to North Dakota, like a Marcy's Law, which is somebody else's one-size-fits-all, and then you leave something up to interpretation by the Attorney General's office, the legislature, having to scramble, trying to put into language with the century code. You create a mess. And we can see what's going on in states around us. 24 states now have legalized marijuana. And I think we can do it in a better way in North Dakota so that it's licensed, the quality control, oversight belongs with the state, and then the taxing ability. One of the things I did as former mayor is I got to read a lot of police reports. I'm not a user myself, nor would I be, but I also, it's tragic when you see somebody that smokes some cannabis and dies of fentanyl overdose. There's a lot of moving parts here on why we should do it in North Dakota for North Dakota and kind of the North Dakota right way.
Steve, you let's examine what you just said for folks that are, especially for folks that are non-users, which is myself included. What do you mean by, because I just want to make it clear, cannabis itself as grown is not, my understanding, capable of like instantly giving someone cardiac arrest or being lethal to them. You're talking about artificially made or incorrectly labeled drugs
laced.
that have fentanyl in them. Yeah, they're laced.
Where you see fentanyl showing up everywhere. The other side of that for me personally is I know the stress on law enforcement and our legal system, and I think a lot of those resources are better utilized in other places rather than marijuana.
Steve, to your point, I mean, I think that's probably, to me, the most persuasive. And I don't use marijuana. I'm not interested in using marijuana. I don't even drink. I'm a little bit of a teetotaler, but to me, that's the most compelling reason is, I look around our state, I look around our communities. The people who want marijuana are getting marijuana. They're getting it from a black market where, to your point, the product's not always safe. The black market is served by people who are often not very good people, not members of the local chamber of commerce, let's say, and are probably also committing other ugly crimes along the way. So those are very compelling reasons, I think, for legalizing it. And so essentially your argument is that just over time, the more people are hearing and probably as generational attitudes shift, your argument is, we're just going to keep making the argument for marijuana, and eventually it's going to click with voters and it's going to get over the finish line. Is that fair?
Well, we're seeing that come in from other states. And the last thing I want to see is another example of, initiated measure that comes in and it passes because people think it's kind of a good idea, but we're not implementing or the ability to manage it like we tend to do in North Dakota. I'm a firm believer if we do it in North Dakota, we're going to do it better than anybody else. And I used to spend a lot of time in Denver, Colorado with work, and what happened there, I don't want to see happen here. Whether it's the examples are Denver and Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles, and we see this unfettered implementation, and they've created the Wild West. If you look at what is proposed here, it's extremely restrictive and it's very manageable in a fashion that the state has a lot of oversight. And I think that's very important that we do something that eventually is going to come if we do it and get ahead of it now rather than having to play catch up later.
Is that the difference then between this measure and the two previous ballot measures that failed within recent memory in North Dakota's elections, and then in the state Senate in 2021? What is the difference between those? Why do you think this one will pass versus those three attempts that failed before?
It's very conservative compared to those previous measures and the legislative piece. So the constraints are there. So we're not unfettering, and the intent isn't to unfetter and create the wild, wild west. The intent is to have a product that is managed by the state. There's state oversight, and the state can reap the benefits financially of having that product come out of the closet and not be in the black market. We're seeing a lot of people that will go to Montana right now and go to Minnesota because it's legal there, and the state's not seeing any benefit of that. those are the two big pieces for me is having the state have the proper oversight and everything that comes with that, and then getting off the teat of what is essentially a black market with cannabis.
One sort of question: we already have legal medicinal marijuana, so in some ways we have an infrastructure in place to regulate something. We're already doing things like regulating where these stores get their marijuana from and how the stores have to be secured and how we have to authenticate that the people who are purchasing it are allowed to purchase it. Some of that infrastructure is in place. How does this integrate with that? For instance, there's a dispensary that for medicinal marijuana, about 6-7 blocks from where I live. Under this, could that dispensary begin to also serve recreational marijuana users in addition to the medicinal? Will they be able to coexist at the same location?
That's up to the state. So you're right in the fact that a lot of the guide rails are already in place with the state on the medical side. This isn't the medical side. This is the recreational side. So a lot of that gets left up to the state. What we're trying to facilitate is the state being able to get in front of how they see the management should be. This measure and the people behind it have nothing to do with how the state looks at implementing it. Has nothing to do on how the state regulates the licensure, how the state would spend the tax dollars. That's not part of this, and that's not our purvey. That belongs up to the state and then the legislators to make those decisions. But facilitating the ability to allow the state to move forward, that's the concern of this sponsoring committee.
Talk to me a little bit about, so with those restrictions, Rob was saying, if I remember correctly, there'd be 7 manufacturing facilities allowed in the state of North Dakota. Dispensaries, is there a limit to the number of dispensaries that could be in a certain?
18.
18 total.
Yeah.
Now, let's do the comparison there with alcohol, which usually gets brought up, and I think justifiably so. We don't have that restriction with alcohol in North Dakota. And now there are a number or a limit to the number of liquor stores you can have in a city, but it's not very restrictive. I mean, there's basically a liquor store within a 5-minute drive of anywhere I go in Fargo, West Fargo, or Moorhead, I think. If not, it's very close. What's the difference here, or what's the need to have this be different and not allow something like that? Or actually, if you're already, to me, if it's going to become recreational, I would think liquor store owners, like responsible ones who have shown that they can run that business well in the eyes of the law and the eyes of their community, why wouldn't they be the prime candidates for something like this, since they already have to go through the over 21 hoops, licensing hoops, criminal background checks for employees, that sort of thing?
And that might be one of the possible avenues the state had. If you take a look at the liquor industry, it is extremely regulated by the state, and there's a lot of oversight by the state, and for good reason. This would be very similar. So that would be a question for the state. If that might be the model, then so be it. Now, you also have another component on the state side when you're looking at alcohol, because there's also a local municipal jurisdiction, and that's the regulation on the number of bars and licenses for bars or liquor stores or combinations thereof. So, you go to a restaurant and it's a special license because you're serving food, or just beer and wine. Those are all the protocols the state's going to have to look at, but that's not a bad model on. There is a lot of oversight and control in that fashion.
So the state in that case could change the number of, I'm already losing the word, distribution hubs, essentially marijuana stores. It could change it from 18. Dispensaries.
Right. And a lot of this language came off of language working with state agencies and the Attorney General's office, the health department. A lot of the language that's here was based off of some of the conversations with some of those agencies in the first place, as well as legislators. So it's addressing the concerns of, we know it's coming. It's just, how do we want to direct it? And Again, I'm a firm believer if North Dakota has the opportunity to put their stamp on something, it's going to turn out better than if you just have to deal with something that gets here anyway.
You are aiming to put this on the November ballot this year, correct?
Yeah, that would be our intent.
That's going to mean
We'd like to see it on.
Yeah,
We'd like to see it on the November ballot because I don't think there's going to be an issue collecting the signatures.
Yeah. I mean, are you, I'm assuming that you guys are going to have to pay petitioners. Cause that's a pretty short timeline in order to make the November ballot. I just relying strictly on a volunteer. I just don't see how you guys are going to do it. I guess you could confirm or deny that. And I guess the other part of it is, you talked earlier about not having, an out-of-state interest come in and do this. Where's the money coming from for the campaign? I mean, because if you are going to have to hire signatures, we've seen with other ballot measure campaigns that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where's the money going to come from? Who's backing this?
A lot of it's grassroots fundraising. So if you go to the website, neweconomicfrontier.com, there's a donate section there. We do have businesses involved that are interested. It could be some of the grow operations currently existing. And as we go through that, the one thing that's going to be very, very transparent is the financial records and who's involved with this operation. So again, it just comes back to, how do we do it better in North Dakota than in other places?
Are you planning on paying signature gatherers though? Has that discussion come up with the group?
We've had the discussion. If we need to, we will look at that, just so that we can get on the November ballot. If we don't think that the November ballot is an attainable goal, which I think it is, then so be it. But we'll address whether or not we have to go down the pay petition or not pay petitioners when we probably next meeting that we have. So we'll address it then.
And the way that works is essentially, I think you guys have until July to make the July 8th, to make the November ballot. But you also have, if you don't make that deadline, you have a full year. Every ballot measure that gets approved for circulation has a full year. So if they miss the deadlines for the ballot that cycle, they still have the full year where they can collect their signatures. They get the requisite number of signatures. They go on the next statewide ballot. So if it's not 2024, it may be 2026, depending on how you guys do collecting signatures. And I just wanted to drill down a little bit on something you said, where you said some of the grow operations currently operating. I mean, and I don't mean this sound unfair. I just want to understand it, because I think it makes sense. If you're in the marijuana business in North Dakota, you may want to expand the market. That I completely understand that. But is that what you're saying? Is some of the people who are involved in the medicinal marijuana measure or market are looking basically to fund this as a way to expand?
Well, you got to look at the medical side of stuff too. So medical right now is incredibly regulated in the state of North Dakota, and state regulations don't let them double dip. So there's going to be a differentiation between the two. But when you're looking at an operation either staying medical or going into the recreational, there's options out there in the business place. So that's up to the private sector to decide what they want to do.
Talk to me a little bit, Steve, about border state considerations. You'd mentioned both. Is Montana right now at legalized recreational? I actually didn't know. They've been back and forth a bit.
Yeah, they are.
So living in Fargo, when we had blue laws, the Walmarts in Fargo and Target couldn't be open until noon on Sundays. But there was a Target and a Walmart in Moorhead and Dilworth, Minnesota, respectively. Dilworth basically being Moorhead. And there really wasn't blue laws. If you wanted to go shopping there, all that happened was the Dilworth Walmart got more business between midnight and noon on Saturday night and Sunday morning. If and when those dispensaries start happening, because I don't believe there are dispensaries for recreational right now in Moorhead. I think there's been some delay in Minnesota's handing out licenses and such. But if there isn't a restriction there, if they go with more of a standard like liquor store model, what you could have, I could see there being a legal on paper version of recreational marijuana in North Dakota, where maybe one is allowed and they're not keeping up with demand or something like that. And then 7 or 8 pop up in Moorhead because no one in the 200 person, if you include the outskirts metro of Fargo and West Fargo, can't get to Moorhead, Minnesota in 10 to 15 minutes. What would you say? And the same, there's in East Grand Forks, and Williston also has a pretty fairly populated area over that they can drive to in Montana. What would you say about that in regards to this measure with how the state can do it? Is this measure, if it passes, going to allow the legislature to adjust it? It's not a constitutional measure. I understand that. So
Correct.
will adjustments be made entirely at a state level? Are municipalities going to be able to get in on this the way that they can with liquor licenses?
So the constraint on the number of dispensaries, that's all state. So if the state wants to open that up, or the legislature wants to have a discussion of what that management and the business opportunities look like, then that's up to the state. So this is written extremely conservative as far as the amounts and the number of facilities, but it is open for state management. That's one of the big things that I had a concern about, was making sure that the state has the ability to do as they see fit. We're just opening up the door for the recreational side of stuff, but it's still going to lie with what North Dakota deems as necessary or deems fit when it comes to the oversight and the regulation.
I saw in the measure that there was some language about for law enforcement, essentially saying that nobody can be, I guess arrested or charged for, or if an officer merely smells, marijuana, or if they see marijuana. The presumption is, and it's a rebuttable presumption, essentially where the state has to prove. They can't say merely this person has marijuana, ergo we're going to arrest them and search them and all this other stuff. It says, they have to prove that they have more marijuana than they're allowed to have, or that they're underage or something like that. And I think that's really interesting. But one, sort of consistent argument we hear against legalization is that we're going to have problems with inebriated like driving. Like we all know we have a drunk driving problem. This is going to add to it, where people are going to be stoned driving. How does law enforcement do this, particularly with the difficulties in, like with alcohol? It's relatively easy to do a breathalyzer test or do some sobriety tests. That's relatively easy. How do they? What would you say to people who are concerned about stoned driving or people driving high, even if they're using marijuana legally?
Well, it just comes down to the chemical test. So you're going to have the same, if you think of it in terms of, rather than being stoned driving or being drunk driving, but impaired driving, then that changes the paradigm a little bit. So it's the impaired driving aspect, which now you've got law enforcement that's still picking up on the same cues. If you're impaired as a driver, for whatever reason that is, you're impaired as a driver and you shouldn't be on the road. So the testing side of it is a little different, because that's the chemical test side of stuff. So that's going to be, we're trying to put in enough language in there so that law enforcement has tools to work with as well.
Speaking of law enforcement, have any official associations, either municipal or statewide, come out with commentary one way or another? Are they gonna? I'm assuming they don't like to get too directly involved in politics, but since it's a product and a subject that revolves so strongly around law enforcement, have any police chiefs or the statewide association made a comment one way or another about supporting or opposing this measure?
As far as opposing or supporting, I have not had that conversation with anyone yet. I have had conversation with some members in law enforcement. Their biggest concern is how it's enforceable and how they have the ability to, if it's a driving case, remove an impaired driver off the road. I have talked to a lot of people in law enforcement too. They're also, they may be a little guarded because of their position,
Sure.
but they're also looking at where the resources should be utilized for the best benefit. And that comes back to the fentanyl and the opioids and the other illicit drugs that we see pouring into North Dakota.
And just a follow up real quick. I think, voters are going to look to law enforcement to see what their opinion is. And you, as a former mayor, I believe you're a current county commissioner. You've been around and you've been very connected to sheriff's associations, Bismarck police.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a conversation you're planning on having with law enforcement to see if they'll give you not a ruling, but an endorsement or one way or another on something like this, so voters could turn to that if they're trying to weigh the options here?
Absolutely. And I've talked to a lot of legislators and different lobbying organizations too, that after having a conversation, they're like, okay, well, we won't be opposing or we won't be supporting. We'll just be neutral on this. And I think that's what we're looking for is let the voters decide for their right reasons. And then let's go do this like we should in North Dakota. It's okay, well, on the surface, let's oppose it, or on the surface, let's support it. Look into it, and then let people do their diligence, do their homework, and make their own decisions.
Just to put some numbers on out there, in 2023, last calendar year, there were 4,451 people charged with like possession or ingestion of marijuana. Now, sometimes we look at it and we say, oh, look, we could just wipe all those off the books. One caveat when we start talking about these numbers is a lot of times you see marijuana charges in addition to other things they're being arrested for. So, like they have possession of marijuana, but they, because a cop found a joint on them while they were breaking into a house or something. Like you see a lot of charges like that. So that's not, we can't say, oh, we're going to take 44,400 and some odd criminal cases off the books. But there is absolutely, I think, an argument to be made that this does reduce the amount. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, has the campaign done, research into, specifically the impact it would have on the criminal justice system in the state?
We've looked at a lot of different studies. We're still compiling what, there's statistics. If you read a study and you want it to say one thing, it'll say that. If you want it to say another thing, you'll say another thing. Somewhere in the middle is the happy medium. We're pretty confident that this is going to take some stress off of law enforcement and also off the legal system, which we see an incredible glut within the legal system. So, and you're exactly right, Rob. A lot of those numbers are derived because, and by the way, they may have had a marijuana cigarette on them, or they may have had a pipe, or so that charge was in conjunction to something else. So that's not the primary charge. We know that those numbers are overinflated. We know that the other side of that is underreported. So somewhere in the middle is the happy medium. And that's what we're going to get out in the media piece as well. It's not a be all end all. It's not, hey, we're going to take all this out of the court system. We're not going to take all this, but somewhere in the middle, there's a workable solution and there's some workable numbers. We're still working through those numbers. It's not the 44,000. It's not far less than that. It's somewhere in between.
Steve, you mentioned multiple times that this is written in a very conservative way and would serve specifically North Dakota in a way that would contrast what Colorado did with legalization, as an example you cited, or Oregon. Is there a precedent, or is there a model that this was based around? Is there another state that passed a law like this that is currently using it? Or if voters vote for this, would North Dakota be the first one to do it kind of in this way?
This is North Dakota. So, there's some language that was taken out of some of the other measures, but when you look at the constriction and the amount that is allowed in possession, it's very conservative. And we're very cognizant of that. We don't want to see something like, great example, Denver, Colorado, 16th Street Mall. And I used to do a lot of work down there. I used to love that part of Denver. And it's untenable now. And that's what we want to prevent. We want to prevent that unwielding, wide open climate that it doesn't fit in North Dakota. It just doesn't. So we want to make sure that we're not going down that road. And that's what some of the other initiated measures that we've seen in other states have come in and done. They've taken the gloves completely off, and we don't want to see that here in North Dakota.
I could tell you I visited Denver last year, and I laugh sometimes at some of the horror stories. And trust me, I get it. When you have a big societal shift in law or culture, there's some pains around it. But I was at the 16th Street Mall last year, and it wasn't that bad. I mean, I was pretty extensively around Denver for several days. And granted, it's an anecdote and everything else, but I mean, there weren't like crazed hippies, running around everywhere. It was fine. Denver's fine.
Compared to where it was prior to
Sure.
Colorado legalizing,
Yes,
it is drastically different.
Yeah. Well, and that's
And
probably.
then, Rob,
I mean,
I used to live in Portland, Oregon,
Yeah.
and what Portland has become is another example, and that's an extreme example, but they've opened up everything there, and that's an example of too far.
and I
As
would.
someone who's had to spend a lot of time at the Denver airport traveling for work, I'm fairly certain whoever designed it was smoking something.
Yeah.
And I don't think
Well,
it was
I don't.
legal.
I will
and
not disagree with that.
But that's neither here nor there for this ballot measure. Steve, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hey, there is one other thing I'd like to add too,
Sure.
because I've had a lot of, Rob, I've done a lot of work out in the oil patch, and with what we're seeing in North Dakota, I've had a lot of people raise some concerns, especially in Western North Dakota, about workforce. And what I've told them and what I would like to convey is, if somebody's not passing a drug test now, this measure has no bearing on whether or not they're going to pass a drug test then. So from a workforce perspective, with the employees you're trying to recruit, this measure really does not have a bearing on that. And I think that's a big concern when you're looking at some of the workforce issues we're seeing in the state. It's a very limited pool that you're trying to recruit from, and this measure has no bearing on that.
Well, and I think that gets to the point that everybody who wants marijuana right now is using marijuana. And
Correct.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I would be surprised if there weren't. Most North Dakotans don't know somebody who is already using marijuana, and probably not legally. So, I mean,
from what I can tell, when Minnesota legalized it, that basically meant it was legal in Grand Forks and Fargo, because it's legal to cross the border, it's legal to buy, and it's legal to take it back there as long as you haven't consumed it while driving.
Yeah.
To me, I don't know how that doesn't mean that recreational marijuana isn't legal in Grand Forks and Fargo. I'm sorry.
Please don't take Chancellor Hansen's comments as legal advice. However, please consult the laws yourself or an actual lawyer. We're not giving anybody legal advice. Recreational marijuana is not legal in Grand Forks and Fargo.
One other thing I'll add to that, and I'm a little bit older. Rob, you're a little bit older. Ben, you're a little younger than us. But from a generational perspective, what I'm seeing with a lot of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, it's the edible side. And that's something that we're addressing in this measure as well, because it's generationally what the consumption of cannabis looks like is different for different people. But I'm seeing 40, 50, 60-year-olds that are just as interested in the gummies or the edible side, because they don't want to light up a marijuana cigarette.
They don't want the smell. They don't want the Well, Steve,
there is something to the actual carbon imprint of smoking on your lungs versus edibles. Again, as a non-consumer, there is a health factor there.
Yeah,
definitely. Steve, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. Looking forward to this debate playing out.
Thanks, gentlemen.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Steve Bakken, former Bismarck mayor, current Burleigh County Commissioner, and proponent of legalizing recreational marijuana. And I suspect as this debate unfolds, we're going to hear a lot of the same I mean, a lot of the debate's going to be the same as it always is. You're going to have one side that is saying this is going to take pressure off our criminal justice system. People are already using it. Let's just go there. And the other side, it's kind of, well, look at Denver struggled, Colorado struggled with it, Washington struggled with it. There's a problem when you bring it out, more people will use it, and that creates impacts. A lot of it's going to be the same debate. I personally come down on the legalize it side. I'd rather deal with the problems out in the daylight. I'd rather take the money away from black market people and put it in the pockets of law-abiding entrepreneurs. That's what I would rather do. And I know, I think sometimes when we have this debate, like both sides are so absolute. Like you have like reefer madness versus, this is going to create utopia. Neither are true. Legalizing recreational marijuana will create some headaches in North Dakota, just as it's created in every place where it's been legalized. But I think those headaches are worth it to get to a place where we're past a prohibition that's just not working.
Yeah, the reefer madness side, to your point, is that impression that like everyone's apparently going to be on it, and two, it's going to do and have effects that marijuana simply just doesn't have on people. But on the other side, what I see from some supporters, and Steve did not mention this, and I haven't seen this on the North Dakota side, is, well, think about all the revenue, sales tax, and otherwise that we're going to get from this. It's going to solve budget problems. And no, it's not. Sales tax is so inconsistent and so unreliable. The money will be big. It should be put to good use.
And a lot of it will be put right back into addressing the regulatory regime we're going to need around this, the inspections, and I would hope, all
of which costs a lot of money,
and a lot of the revenue, frankly, I think should go towards, whatever's left over should go towards fighting addiction, mental health, things like that.
I've always had a philosophical problem with the debate against marijuana legalization, where even growing, never mind all these states that have now legalized it, which, yes, are 24, I think Steve says, states. Growing up in the 90s in North Dakota when no states had it legal, I think before California had its wink medical marijuana statute passed, growing up in the 90s in Fargo, to this day, you can't throw a rock or swing a golf, hit a golf ball and not hit a liquor store. And it is perfectly legal for me, if I wanted to, and I don't, to go, or anyone to go to that liquor store, buy 5 gallons of, take your pick, of hard liquor. Enough that if I consumed it in a day, I would die, or someone else would die. Again, not my intent, but it's legal for me to do that, and it's legal for me to go there every day and purchase that amount of liquor. There is no criminal penalty for it. There's no criminal penalty for them selling it to me as long as I'm producing legal tender. I'm over the age of 21. And so then this idea that this other substance is so bad, when you look at the sheer amount of, seriously, domestic abuse problems, DUIs, violent assaults that are alcohol related, and then say that, oh, but we can't, this product is going to be so much more dangerous, in addition to the detrimental health effects that alcohol definitely has on the human body. I can't understand how ununiform the law is right now.
Well, all the things you just said about alcohol are true. They contribute to a panoply of social ills, from domestic violence to drunk driving to obviously alcoholism, people who it impacts careers, everything else. It has an enormous negative impact on our society, but we keep it legal because prohibition was worse. Prohibition was
Absolutely.
worse, where people were drinking alcohol that could make you go blind or that could kill you. You had violent gangsters who were enriching themselves. It promoted political corruption. It promoted a fundamental disrespect for the rule of law. And really, in a lot of ways, marijuana is in that same place. Again, I know fine, upstanding, responsible, professionally successful people who use marijuana regularly, and not for medicinal purposes, but for recreational purposes, and they buy it illegally from the black market, and and not even that sinister. Like I know somebody who sells it.
I know accidentally a lot of people that use edibles to sleep at night. And I'm not doing the like, oh, I know a friend, but it's really me. Like I actually don't. But I do know a lot of people that do like a little like very mild dose half edible something as a sleeping thing, and it really apparently helps them.
It is funny because for practically my entire more than 2-decade writing career, I have been for legalizing marijuana. And in fact, when I grew up in Alaska in the 80s, marijuana was legal up there.
Upport's been trying to get North Dakota high for decades.
Yeah, well, that sounded perfect, like one of these attack ads that are blanketing our television screens right now. I mean, so a lot of people accuse me of like being a pothead. I will admit I tried it a couple of times. I don't really like it. I don't really like being inebriated in general. I drank more alcohol than I should have when I was a kid. Marijuana was never really my thing, and now I don't use any of it. I have no dog in this fight. I don't have any interest in a marijuana business. I don't plan on buying marijuana. Not particularly interested in it. I don't like my mood to be altered really by anything. I barely take Tylenol. So that's just me personally.
Rob Port's a totally lame square who probably drinks that sleepy time tea around 9 o'clock.
I'm not even that exciting. I have like a glass of water.
So I'm wondering what, and this isn't, it's actually not fair because I didn't really ask Steve this. I asked what's different about the ballot measure, but I wonder what the difference in North Dakota voters is going to be, because I believe Steve and the Steve Bakken, who's our guest today, and the committee for this are being completely sincere when they say they've written a conservative version that is different than the previous two that have been on the ballot.
It is very well written. And by the way, we should point out on the sponsoring committee, two very well-known criminal defense attorneys, Mark Fries from the Vogel law firm, Chad McCabe, who's based in Bismarck.
But those are all facts. I'm talking about political narrative and a ballot-wide measure. Are voters going to know what that difference is? Or are they going to hear this will legalize weed? You're either before it or you're against it before, vote again. And I could see it being that. I'm wondering what their campaign is going to do to express that difference. Because right now, there are parallel campaigns to that too. There's the legalize campaign in South Dakota being headed up by people who are generally associated with the South Dakota Republican Party. They're basically saying the same talking points. And I'm wondering how they make it salient and get through the noise of, you either think marijuana's something that's a gateway drug and it's bad, you'd never vote for it. You don't care if it's conservative or not. You think it's bad and you think it should be illegal. There are plenty of those voters in the state of North Dakota. And in fact, I'd argue that's why they were the majority the last two times. Slim majority, but majority.
I think there's going to be two keys to this ballot measure winning. One is going to be the point you just made, and I made it previously when I was talking to some of the organizers about their measure. It's not my place to advise them, but my perception is they need to talk about why they need to show the voters that they listened. We understand why you voted no, and we're trying to address your concerns. And here are the specific ways in which this measure addresses your concerns. They need to talk about that. The other thing, though, is a little bit out of their control, and I think it's just the general cultural shift. Marijuana is just becoming more acceptable, and I think it's becoming more acceptable every year.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, the people who use marijuana are being a little bit less secretive about it, even though it is still illegal. And people are being surprised maybe by the sort of people in their lives who are using it. They're seeing that it can be used responsibly. That is taking an impact. That is having an impact on the public's opinion. Now, one potential pitfall is, and this is a good transition to the other topic that we want to talk about, is this sort of reignited move towards, I don't know what you want to call it, Christian fundamentalism or something. I mean, Donald Trump's hawking Bibles and all this other stuff.
Those who think that is a new or reorganized thing haven't knocked on a lot of doors for local campaigns for a long time. I think that's been there. Now it's organized. Now they're getting better.
It's organized and it's louder and it's more prominent in the politics of 2024 than it has been in a long time.
I just want to say real quick to your first point, just the last thing on the marijuana ballot measure. That's why I asked Steve about law enforcement, because I think that persuasion of this being a different kind of marijuana legalization ballot measure could have a permission structure given to it if law enforcement came out for it. I also understand why law enforcement would say, hey man, We're the North
Yeah.
Dakota Police Association. We're not supposed to be endorsing statewide ballot measures. You know what? Why are you asking me? But that I think would be the key
Well,
to getting the majority of North Dakotans to vote for it.
like cops in an official capacity can't really get into politics. Although I mean, and that's always kind of a gray line. I don't have a problem if a sheriff or a police chief or somebody wants to talk about what they believe the practical impacts of a policy proposal will be. These are people with expertise. You know, they were either hired or elected to their positions because of that expertise. I don't mind hearing from them. I will say it is going to be a heavy lift to get cops on board with this. You might be able to talk to and I have talked to rank and file patrol officers or whatever who get a little tired of busting people for having an ounce of pot or something. But on the other side, you got to remember that how often when a law enforcement officer is coming into a situation, marijuana is not the only issue that they're there. Like very rarely. And a lot of times marijuana, because they can smell it or something, gives them the nexus they need to do a search to discover maybe what they're really after. It is a useful tool for them. And I think it's going to be very, very hard to ask cops to want to put that tool back in the toolbox.
And I'm not a law enforcement expert. I haven't been there in those 10 situations. I would maybe argue, just hypothetically off the top of my head, that if there is clearly marijuana is involved when there's a mixture of criminal activity, if you're suspecting there's either an abuse or a violent situation going on, or a situation with other substances where you can tell some other substances are happening. Like if you're hearing a violent conflict and you're suspecting that, it's not as if they're holding back and waiting to see if they can smell marijuana.
No, but I'm saying if they want to take a look in somebody's trunk,
there's a civil liberties component there too, though. That's very real.
I mean,
and you know that.
I think it's very, very hard to get police officers on board with making fewer things illegal. I think and I'm not trying to like besmirch, but sometimes, and again, I completely welcome the input of the law enforcement community, but we got to remember they're seeing the world through a very specific lens and the lens of their jobs and their lives that they live. And I understand it. It is a valid point of view, but it can be a little myopic.
Absolutely. So let's get into our headlined, what is it? Holy Rollers Conference of Bismarck.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't use the term holy rollers, and I have, but yes, it's New Song Church. I wrote a lengthy profile of them a while ago, a few weeks back. They have a leadership conference coming up. They're saying it's not a political conference, but there are 11 elected Republican speakers. Well, not all of them elected, but there's 11 Republicans speaking, 5 of whom are on the ballot. Yeah, there's quite a few.
Let's name them. Where's the list at? I was trying to find it here. Sorry to do the behind-the-scenes meeting.
I'm glad that you interjected to say something that you weren't prepared to say. That was great, Ben.
Yeah, not a problem. That's what I'm here for. Chad O'Ban would never.
It's Senator Kevin Cramer is going to be there. ND GOP Party Chair Sandy Sanford's going to be there. Drew Wrigley's going to be there. Auditor Josh Gallian's going to be there. Bismarck area state lawmaker Brandon Pritchard's going to be there. U.S. House candidates Alex Balaz and Rick Becker are going to be there. And by the way, Cramer, Gallian, Pritchard, Balaz, Becker, they're all on the ballot.
Some of them are on a contentious June primary ballot, even. So I mean, we're talking about, like, this isn't just like the November election that's far away. Becker's. Some would argue that Becker's real race is in June against 4 other Republican opponents.
I think Becker probably makes the general of all the Republican candidates who could emerge from that process of the 3 that are most likely to emerge, or 4, I guess: Alex Balaz, Julie Fedorchak, Karaman, and Becker. I would say Becker probably makes the general election most competitive for Democrats. I realize that's a hot take. Not everybody agrees with me on that, but
I got back and forth on that. But your point is here: these are people who are running for office, headlining
an event at a church that doesn't pay taxes because they're not supposed to engage in partisan politics. Now, the organizer of the event, who's also the pastor, the pastor's daughter, says it's not political. These people were picked for their views. She, on LGBTQ issues and everything else. She claims to have invited other people from other areas of the political spectrum. She declined to name any of those people, so I don't know. To me, the politics, and it's hard for me to say this because I'm not a spiritual person, and I don't want to stand in judgment with how other people, worship their God. It does worry me, though, the degree to which we're seeing churches just kind of turn, or Sunday service turn into like political rallies. I think it's a problem nationally, and I think increasingly it's a problem here in North Dakota. And we have a superintendent candidate, Jim Bartlett, who's a candidate for superintendent of public schools, won the NDGOP's convention endorsement earlier this month. I wrote about it earlier this week, where he is sending campaign emails out to churches asking them to advertise his campaign in their churches, and he addresses the nonprofit.
That's pretty explicit. I don't know how else you can interpret that.
And I just don't. I think that's a very relevant thing. How comfortable are we with this, North Dakotans? Do we want politics from the pulpit? And I don't have a problem with whether it's Jews or Catholics or Lutherans or Buddhists or whoever. Obviously their spirituality informs how they see the world, and obviously is going to inform their public policy preferences. And I don't have a problem with that. It feels to me like we're crossing a line.
To your point about it becoming more prevalent, so this group, they haven't had rallies with either elected officials or candidates like this before. There haven't been. I know Drew Wrigley, someone who's, for instance, is someone whose faith is very close to his identity as a person, even the way he runs for office. I don't think that's mischaracterizing him. I think you would agree with that. Has someone like him done events like this, or Kevin Kramer done events like? Or I actually don't know. I don't attend Bismarck area churches.
I think this type of event, yes, is new. Now I should point out, Senator Kramer is a member of this church. The pastor of the church, Kurt Chafee, has appeared in Kramer's campaign ads in the past. And when I did my previous, I spoke with dozens of people who left the church. Some of whom told me who worked on staff, told me they were explicitly told like who to vote for in 2018 when Kevin Kramer was running for the North Dakota Senate. And that was the same cycle where the pastor appeared in a Kramer campaign ad. Now, Kramer says he doesn't believe it actually happened. The pastor, Kurt Chafee, didn't respond to my inquiries. So I guess make of that what you will. But it's bothersome to me, and it's bothersome to me from a legal standpoint, in that I think this church is engaging in partisan politics. There's a reason why they don't have to pay taxes, and it's because they're not supposed to do that. And it sure looks to me like they're doing it. And I think we ought to be asking the question, not just of this church, but a lot of churches. We built a line there for a reason, and they're crossing it. The other thing that I have a problem with, though, is also some of the stuff, the content of some of what they're speaking. When I hear, and if you go and read my article, they're talking about that they're fighting evil. They're fighting evil. And I think we have enough of that in American politics right now, where we think the other side is evil. Like, it's okay to think the other side's wrong, but using a word like evil should be reserved for, like, if the people on the other side are like Hamas or Al Qaeda or neo-Nazis or something. Yes, they're evil. But people who think, a book in a children's library where the kid has two dads, they're evil. I don't know.
And I'd have to see the content to know, and I'd have to see the program, and they shouldn't be required to, film it and be put under scrutiny like that if it's not a campaign rally. But if, say, their opponents were being lumped into that, or Becker's in a multiple, person Republican primary right now, I want to
interrupt you though, Ben, because it kind of is a campaign rally. If you go to their event page, listed among the sponsors is the Alex Balaz U.S. House campaign, is the Rick Becker U.S. House campaign. It's literally sponsored by the campaigns. How is it not a rally?
And at that point, and if there's specifically the theme is we're fighting evil, I don't know how far you have to take it before, let's connect some dots here. Is Julie Fedorchak evil then? She's not one of the people attending. Is Cara Mund evil? Are the Democratic opponents, is Katrina Christensen or Trygve Hammer? You get my point.
Right.
To your point, are these, evil incarnate then? Is that what they're telling their supporters to do? Because it's a slippery slope argument, and you could argue that is a flawed argument, therefore. But I could see that intensifying into something that could get ugly then if you're going down that path.
But again, we don't have to suppose that. We all saw what happened on January 6th.
No.
No,
you're absolutely right.
We all know. I mean, this is a national issue where you have churches across the nation, and Tim Alberta's got a great book about this, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. He's an evangelical himself. He's a national media reporter. He's an evangelical himself. His father was an evangelical pastor, but he's talking about churches that are active in promoting conspiracy theories about vaccines, conspiracy theories about stolen elections, and churches that are talking about the people who were jailed for January 6th, convicted of crimes related to January 6th, and making excuses for them. We don't have to suppose that there is extremism flowing out of this sort of thing. We could see it with our own eyes. Now, we get gaslighted a lot because we get told, the government, a lot of the January 6th people were mistreated and they're political prisoners and all the other stuff. And there's a point, though, at which you just got to believe what you're seeing with your own eyes.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I don't love getting into January 6th because it is important, though, and it's important that you're bringing it up. It gets so mentioned and so talked about. I mean, it's impossible, though, to your point. I mean, when people are destroying property, literally crushing other human beings, including cops, under their physical weight, or hitting them, or literally injuring and killing them, I don't know how you can make 1, 2, 3 ways about that. I mean, it's pretty direct. I have a problem, depending on, and you said it was said by former employees and you did not get a response from an employer, but whether or not they pay taxes, if an employer is telling an employee how to vote, actually, I don't believe it matters what your tax status is. If I'm a cashier at Fleet Farm and my manager says you must vote this way, I think not only is that, I find that problematic myself, I think that's illegal. Am I wrong?
I don't know, and I don't care to weigh in on it. I think it's wrong. I don't know if
that's very uncomfortable. That's very
I will say to the other one other point about this, and I think it really speaks to the question of whether or not this is political or whether this is just churches pursuing, obviously their mandate, their duty to pursue a certain moral course. One thing that really bothers me is that standing astride this movement that is being promoted in these churches is Donald Trump, the serial adulterer Donald Trump, the crude man who has talked about, who has been held civilly liable for raping a woman in a court of law, who is a crude person, and in many ways is not. I mean, we could go down the list of how many of the 10 Commandments this man is violated. And so it's very hard for me. If you're telling me that the purpose of your church is not political, but it's moral, but yet you turn around and you support somebody like Donald Trump, who so clearly violates the strictures of your faith, and yet you're supporting him anyway, why should I believe that you're on that what you're doing is just moral or cultural as opposed to political? It seems like it's political. It seems like you are making a political calculation to support a political movement headed by a man who is by definition a violator of multiple of your central tenets of your faith.
And I think they would say, and they've said as such, that, and guests running in North Dakota races on this very program have said this year, they're not going to comment on Donald Trump personally. And the reason for that, I feel, is they think that, to your earlier point, they're fighting an evil. They're fighting this is worth it. This is worthwhile to have his form of policies in office because they believe the opposition, and in this case, that is the National Democratic Party. There's no bones about it. That is what they are fighting in that case. In particular with Donald Trump is wokeism and a national coastal political cultural movement that they're opposed to, and the warts on Trump are just not a deal breaker for those particular people. I don't think that is necessarily majority voters, and getting back into national politics there, I believe it was Pennsylvania just had their kind of leftovers Republican primary. Trump's a nominee for president, but a few states are still having theirs. And Nikki Haley still got 24%. So people bothered going out in Pennsylvania to vote in a Republican primary that was done, and a fourth of them vote for Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
So this isn't the case everywhere. There's clearly real opposition within ranks. If you bother to vote in something, frankly, as boring and already decided as the Republican primary now, and you flip your vote to Nikki Haley, I don't see that as being a Trump voter in November.
Well, I think I wrote the stories about Newsong, not because I'm trying to pick on Newsong, but because I think it's a local example of a national and statewide trend. What's happening in these churches has become hugely influential in the outcomes that we are seeing at the ballot box. And so what's happening in these churches needs public scrutiny. People need to look at it. It needs to be shown to the public, and voters need to decide if they're okay with it and how much they want to allow it to influence the way they vote. It's something we have, as uncomfortable as it is. And trust me, I'm not comfortable. I am very much a pro-religious liberty person. I don't want to be up in your pew with you. I don't want to be telling you how to worship. But when you purposely put your church, your religious organization, on an intersecting course with, our elections and our politics, then you're going to have to accept the spotlight. You're kind of inviting us all in then at that point, if that's what you're going to do.
And those candidates need to be speaking to it too, speaking to what their motivations are. And some of them, my understanding was they did with you, but like we need to be hearing from them, because at the point that you're asking for the vote, you're asking to be holding elected office, and in many cases write laws that we all have to live by. You need to make your stance clear. What evil is? Define what evil you think you are fighting by being part of this. Define what you think are appropriate labels for leaders in our state. I am a little worried that some of them would simply embrace it and say that, no, I do think that these people are evil. But that is an assumption of mine. That's not, they need to be asked that question.
Well, we're going to end it there. Ben, thank you so much for sitting in as always. We'll have more guests next week. I haven't booked any of them yet. I got to figure out who that is, but
I'll figure that out later.
Yeah, I always
that's a Monday Rob Poor problem.
That's a Monday problem. It's Friday. That's a Monday problem. All right, we're gonna end it there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcast. We have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcast and explore them all today.